Aliens laughed at the small curved blade as if it were nothing more than a discarded trinket, but Aiko Tanaka stood silent within her containment cell, watching their jeers with controlled stillness. She was young, slight, and bruised, yet her posture betrayed neither fear nor submission. Only a patient awareness that unsettled those who bothered to notice. Most of the Dominion soldiers did not notice, because they were too busy mocking the primitive weapon taken from her destroyed ship, turning it over in their claws with exaggerated contempt. The arena-like chamber where she was held thrummed with electric hums. Each pulse of power reflected in the silvered plates of the warship's walls, yet Aiko's focus remained fixed on the blade. It was the last remnant of her heritage, a symbol of discipline and responsibility. And seeing it toss around like a child's toy stirred an ache she forced herself not to reveal. Commander Veshtal, towering above the others with armor like forged stone, lifted the blade between two ridged claws and clicked his mandibles in amusement. "This is what humans call a weapon?" he asked the room, allowing the question to roll slowly through the gathered soldiers, as if savoring their shared arrogance. Aiko listened without shifting, because every word told her exactly what she needed to know about these conquerors who believed themselves unchallenged. They feared guns, starships, and planetary shields, but they did not fear her, and for the moment that ignorance was her only advantage. A guard, irritated by her silence, struck the cell's energy barrier with a long staff, sending ripples of force crackling across its surface, yet Aiko refused to flinch. Her stillness was not defiance, at least not the kind she believed would provoke them. It was calculation, the quiet gathering of breath and purpose she had practiced since childhood. Every lesson from her parents, every movement drilled into muscle and memory, hovered just beneath her skin, restrained only by the uncertainty of what awaited her outside the cell. When the barrier finally dissolved, the sudden release of pressure felt like a door swinging open inside her, not to freedom but to necessity. Two guards approached with the swagger of creatures accustomed to obedience, and they gestured for her to move forward, though neither expected resistance. She stepped out with deliberate calm, testing the condition of her limbs after days of confinement, noting the stiffness in her joints without allowing it to slow her. The commander dropped the blade at her feet, and its clear metallic ring spread through the chamber like a challenge cast onto ancient stone. "Pick it up," Veshtal ordered, not because he believed she could use it effectively, but because humiliation entertained him. Aiko bent slowly, not out of reluctance, but to savor the moment her fingers closed around something familiar, something that anchored her against the vastness of fear. The weight steadied her, reminding her of early mornings spent practicing in quiet dojos, when every movement was a meditation on intention, not violence. She straightened with the blade held at her side, and though her body still trembled from captivity, her gaze no longer wavered. Veshtal leaned closer, studying her with renewed curiosity, as if some subtle shift in her bearing suggested a threat he had not expected. "What do you intend to do with that relic?" he asked, lowering his voice in mock gravity. Though the glint in his eyes revealed he still found her effort amusing. Aiko did not answer immediately, because she understood the power of timing and silence, and when she finally spoke, her voice emerged steady. "I intend to remember who I am," she said, knowing the word would confuse him but needing them for herself. The soldiers around her shifted uneasily, sensing something they could not articulate, a tension rising from her quiet confidence rather than any overt threat. Veshtal waved his hand dismissively, as though brushing away a minor disturbance, yet his posture betrayed an irritation he struggled to hide. "Then show us," he commanded, stepping back to give her space, though the gesture was far less generous than it appeared. Aiko inhaled deeply, letting the cold metallic air flow through her, grounding her in a moment and reminding her that survival required clarity, not haste. She raised the blade just enough to signal readiness, and the subtle shift in her stance caused several guards to tighten their grips on their weapons, though they could not explain why. The room quieted, anticipation pressing against every pair of eyes fixed upon her, and in that silence Aiko understood once more that she was not simply a captive being taunted with her own heritage, but the hinge of a moment that could shift everything. She exhaled softly, ready for whatever followed next from watching enemies. The first guard advanced before Aiko had fully secured her footing, lunging with reckless confidence that revealed how little he regarded her as a threat. She stepped aside with controlled shift of weight, allowing his momentum to slice through empty air, and the blade in her hand traced a clean, deliberate line along the joint of his armor. It was not a lethal cut, nor even a disabling one, but it sent a tremor of unease through the surrounding soldiers. They had expected wild flailing or panic retreat. Instead, they witnessed precision, restraint, and an almost surgical calm. The guard stumbled forward, startled by her refusal to cling to fear. Aiko inhaled, grounding herself as the chamber's energy hum vibrated beneath her feet, and she noted the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The jeering had quieted. The arrogance had thinned. Her captors were beginning to see her not as a trembling hostage, but as an unknown variable, and unknowns unsettle conquerors. A second guard approached more cautiously, his movements less brash, his posture bent toward calculation rather than mockery. Aiko recognized the change instantly. Discipline taught her to observe the smallest details, the angle of his stance, the controlled flicker of his eyes, the tension in his jaw that betrayed genuine focus. When he raised his weapon and slashed downward, she met the strike with a measured lateral sweep, redirecting the blow so it cracked against a metallic floor instead of her shoulder. Sparks burst upward, briefly illuminating the silent exchange of understanding between them. This guard recognized her ability, and that recognition lent weight to every movement. Aiko countered with a swift tap to his forearm, dislodging his grip on the weapon without shattering bone. She knew she could not win through aggression alone. She needed information, timing, and the chance to observe their patterns before the true threat arrived. As the second guard retreated, clutching his arm in shock, murmurs rippled through the gathered soldiers. Their expressions shifted from ridicule to wary intrigue, but Veshtal's face revealed something deeper: irritation. The commander's pride was not accustomed to challenge, especially from someone so small, so seemingly fragile. His mandibles twitched in agitation as he stepped forward, his heavy armor scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed like thunder across metal valleys. Aiko felt the weight of his attention settle on her, and though her heart pounded, she refused to lower her gaze. Veshtal gestured sharply, summoning two more guards who approached with synchronized precision, their movements practiced and efficient. These were not inexperienced soldiers. They were trained enforcers who understood formation and timing. Aiko's breath tightened, but she anchored herself with the memory of countless drills, slow, patient practice that had sharpened her reflexes long before she ever saw the inside of a starship. The first enforcer struck from the left, the second from the right, forcing her to retreat 2 steps and reconsider her options. She blocked one blow, ducked beneath another, and allowed the rhythm of the fight to settle into a pattern she could navigate. The blade in her hand became not an extension of aggression, but a tool of clarity, guiding her through the chaos. She landed a single clean strike across the knee joint of the left enforcer, causing his stance to buckle. Before he could recover, she spun and delivered a swift hilt strike to the second enforcer's wrist, loosening his grasp just long enough to force him off balance. The room grew tense, the air thick with rising hostility, but beneath that tension lay something else: confusion. The Dominion soldiers were witnessing an outcome they had not anticipated. Every movement she made contradicted their expectations. They had come prepared to mock, not to adjust their tactics. Aiko could feel their uncertainty building, yet she also sensed the danger in that shift. Once arrogance gave way to caution, once amusement turned to calculation, the Dominion would escalate with severity. She needed to stay ahead of that shift, and she needed to understand both her surroundings and her captors well enough to survive what came next. Veshtal's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Enough testing. His tone lacked its earlier amusement. Now it carried the sharp edge of authority. He stepped closer, analyzing her with a gaze that pierced through superficial impressions. "You fight with discipline," he said, not as praise but as a strategic observation. "But discipline cannot save you from consequence." His hand lifted in a curt motion, and the guards tightened their formation around her. Aiko held her stance, blade angled low, breath steady despite the encroaching danger. She knew she could not win a prolonged battle against overwhelming numbers. She knew her strength lay not in sheer power, but in precision and adaptability. And she felt with rising certainty that Veshtal was preparing to introduce a new phase of conflict, one designed not to mock her but to crush her resolve completely. Yet the flicker of calculation in his eyes told her something else. He was not entirely certain of the outcome. That uncertainty gave her space, a narrow opening she intended to seize when the moment came. As the soldiers around her shifted, forming a tightening circle, Aiko adjusted her grip on the blade. She could sense the commander's next move approaching like a storm, and she answered it with silent resolve. Though surrounded, she did not shrink. Though outnumbered, she did not yield. The chamber vibrated with building tension, and Aiko felt the story push forward into a confrontation she knew would decide far more than her fate alone. A subtle shift in Veshtal's posture revealed the moment he decided to end the spectacle. His soldiers widened the circle, giving him space as he descended into the arena with the deliberate weight of a creature accustomed to domination. His armor reflected the chamber's cold light in jagged angles, and each step struck the floor with the heavy finality of an executioner approaching his task. Aiko steadied her breath, sensing that this confrontation would eclipse everything that had come before. She tightened her grip on the blade, not out of bravado, but because it grounded her in the memory of every lesson that had shaped her. Her body ached from the earlier clashes, each bruise and wound tugging at her focus, yet beneath the pain lived an unwavering core that refused to fracture. Veshtal halted a short distance away and studied her with a calculating stillness that replaced his earlier mockery. "You have skill," he said, his deep voice reverberating to the chamber like distant thunder. "But skill is not victory. Skill is not survival. And skill cannot alter destiny." Aiko recognized a shift in his tone, less arrogant, more dangerous. He now viewed her as a variable that needed to be corrected, not a curiosity to be mocked. She raised her blade slightly, adopting the stance that had served her through countless trials, and answered with quiet resolve. "Destiny is shaped by those who refuse to surrender." Her words carried neither threat nor defiance, only conviction, yet they drew a flicker of irritation across the commander's face. Without warning, Veshtal lunged. The speed of his movement startled even the watching soldiers, who instinctively stepped back as his massive frame blurred forward. Aiko pivoted, barely avoiding the sweeping arc of his clawed arm, but the force of his strike sent a blast of air against her side, staggering her balance. She recovered quickly, though not quickly enough to evade the backhand that followed. The blow struck her ribs with crushing impact, and she gasped as pain surged through her with blinding clarity. She stumbled but did not fall, forcing her legs to steady beneath her even as her vision wavered. Veshtal's mandibles curled in a predatory smile. "Stand as long as you wish," he said. "The end does not change." Aiko swallowed against the ache in her lungs, understanding that she could not match him in raw strength. Her survival depended on precision, patience, and the ability to read the subtle rhythms of his attacks. When he advanced again, she did not retreat. Instead, she stepped inward at the last possible instant, allowing his strike to pass close enough that she felt the rush of displaced air graze her cheek. Her blade traced a tight, efficient path along a seam in his armor, creating a thin line of sparks that confirmed the weakness she had hoped to find. Veshtal snarled, enraged by the mark she had left on him. His next strike was more ferocious, driven by anger rather than strategy, and Aiko used that shift to her advantage. She ducked beneath his wild swing and delivered a controlled slash to the back of his knee joint, forcing him to momentarily drop to one leg. The soldiers watching sucked in breaths of disbelief, their eyes darting between their commander and the human girl who refused to break. Yet even as she landed these calculated strikes, Aiko felt her strength waning. Her breaths grew shallow, each movement costing her more effort than the last. She knew she could not sustain this pace indefinitely. Veshtal rose with a roar, his fury now fully ignited. He charged again, and this time his assault came with a barrage of rapid strikes that allowed her no time to counter. She blocked one, dodged another, but the third caught her shoulder, sending her spinning across the floor. She hit the ground hard, her blade sliding several feet away. Pain exploded through her arm, and she cried out before clenching her jaw to contain the sound. The commander approached with victorious stride, convinced she no longer possessed the means to resist him. Aiko forced herself to crawl toward the fallen blade, each motion a battle against the weight of exhaustion and fear. Veshtal extended his arm, claws poised to end her before she reached it. Her fingers brushed the hilt just as his shadow engulfed her, and she turned onto her back, clutching the weapon across her chest offensively. He raised his arm high, confident the final blow would land without contest. But in that desperate instant, Aiko saw a glint above him, a sparking cable dangling low from the ceiling, loosened by their earlier collision. Summoning the last of her strength, she rolled aside and drove her blade upward into the cable, severing it cleanly. Electricity burst downward in a violent cascade, arcing across Veshtal's armor with a crackling fury. He roared, staggering as the surge overwhelmed his suit systems and sent smoke curling from its joints. Aiko struggled to her feet, trembling, and approached the stunned commander. She met his disbelieving gaze, then delivered a final precise strike that forced him to collapse in a thunderous heap. The watching soldiers stood motionless, unable to reconcile what they had just witnessed. Aiko breathed unevenly but remained upright, gripping the blade with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She knew this victory was only the beginning, a single breach in the Dominion's illusion of invincibility. And though her body begged for rest, her mind already reached forward, aware that survival would require more than a single victory. The path ahead remained uncertain, but the spark of possibility had ignited, urging her toward whatever came next.